right. I'll make sure it's connected to the right audio. Yeah, alright. So, in a couple minutes, I'll start reading chapter 3. Last time we read about 50 pages, which took about 2 hours. And we got through the introduction, chapter 1 and chapter 2, which went over the very basic, uncontroversial ethical principles, and then the history of animal farming and how it got to where it is today. And then this chapter, There's No Such Thing as a Happy Farm Animal, is about how animals are currently treated in each industry of food production. And we're only going to get through chapter 3 today because it is 50 pages. And it's probably going to take 2 hours. Okay. Chapter 3. There's no such thing as a happy farm animal. Outside of a slaughterhouse on a cold winter's morning, a farmer pulled up to the entrance. He was towing a trailer, inside which were several pigs. As he waited for the workers to let him in, I stood and spoke to him through his wound-down car window. He assured me that he absolutely cared about the pigs, and that their well-being had always been the most important thing to him. I asked him if their imminent slaughter was the best thing for their well-being and constituted care. He looked at me, told me to step back from the side of the car, and proceeded to drive in. I peered through a gap in the gates and watched as a worker, whose white overalls displayed a long smear of blood across the front, proceeded to force the pigs out of the trailer and through an open door and into a building that represents the antithesis of love. A place where not even hope can be found. It is really appealing to believe the narrative that animal products come from happy animals who live a great life and are treated with care and respect. It eases our conscience as consumers and reinforces the idea that buying animal products is not a moral concern. We want to believe that any farmers who are exposed for abusing their animals are simply bad apples and don't represent an inherent systematic problem. The reality is there is no such thing as happy exploitation, happy mutilations, or happy forced impregnations. And there is no such thing as a happy farm animal, as abuse and exploitation is an inherent and fundamental part of what we do to animals, regardless of how they are farmed. It is easy to allow ourselves to think that the labels and assurances that we give to animal products must mean something significant. But the notion of animal welfare can never really hold an animal's best interest at heart, as its purpose is to facilitate the continuation of animal exploitation in a way that remains profitable. These labels may make us feel better as consumers, but every animal will still one day meet the knife hanging in the slaughterhouse. As a vegan who was brought up in England, I am often reminded that the UK has among the highest animal welfare standards in the world, and told that while it is understandable to be against the US system of intensive factory farming, British family-run farms abide by our high standards, so I needn't worry. Everyone knows bad things happen to animals in other parts of the world, is the implication, but we would never allow animal abuse in this country. Ironically, in every country I have ever visited, I have always met people who told me that their animals are treated better than anywhere else, including in the USA, where I was defiantly told that in Texas they have the best animal husbandry practices in the world. This exceptionalism is not, therefore, something that only exists in the UK. That said, there is some truth in the statement that the UK has some of the highest animal welfare standards. In global rankings, the UK, Switzerland, Austria, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden are the best in the world when it comes to animal welfare laws. Unfortunately, this makes what happens even more damning, because it is not the ranking that is important, but what occurs in the countries at the top of those rankings. So, it is worth noting that everything that is mentioned in this chapter, unless otherwise stated, occurs in a country that is considered one of the best in the world. Meaning that when it comes to the lives of farmed animals, this is as good as it gets. It is also worth saying that what follows in this chapter is far from comfortable, and much of what is discussed is difficult to read and extremely upsetting. But it is important to understand the reality of what is happening, and what we are paying for when we buy animal products. While it may be unpleasant for us to read about how badly animals are treated, it is far more unpleasant for them to have to experience it. The animals can't simply skip this chapter, which of course you can. This is what they are forced to endure. Don't trust the red tractor. In the UK, there are a number of schemes intended to reassure consumers that the animal products they buy are sourced from reputable farms with high animal welfare standards. But do welfare schemes such as Red Tractor and RSPCA assured actually safeguard the animals and ensure that they are treated well? The Red Tractor label is the UK's largest animal welfare certification scheme, and, in their own words, is supposed to assure us that the animals have been well cared for. It is a huge selling point for farmers and a source of reassurance for consumers, with the sticker of approval proudly displayed on just about every animal product that comes from a British farm. However, what many people are not aware of is that the Red Tractor scheme was set up by the National Farmers Union, NFU, and it is owned by the NFU and other industry bodies such as Dairy UK. On their board, which is in charge of developing Red Tractor standards, there are, among others, members who have worked for some of the largest meat companies in Europe, a board member who is also the CEO of a powerful lobby group, the British Meat Processors Association, and a member who is also the agricultural director for Avara Foods Limited, a joint venture between Fazenda Foods Limited and Cargill. These companies are the largest producers of chicken, turkey, and duck products in the UK, and conditions on their farms are regularly exposed as being horrendous for the animals, with violations of Red Tractor standards routinely documented. Are we really expected to believe that an audit from an inspector is going to provide any real accountability for a farm that is owned by a company whose agricultural director also sits on the board of the organization that is auditing it? As Red Tractor was set up by the NFU, an organization funded by the membership fees of farmers, the same farmers it is supposed to be auditing, it is, in essence, an assurance scheme run by the very people it is supposed to hold accountable. It was also set up following the BSE crisis in the 1990s, specifically to reassure consumers at a time when trust in the UK agricultural system had been eroded, which ironically happened because of farming practices that were encouraged by the animal farming industries, the same industries that now run the Red Tractor scheme. It is nothing other than a smokescreen created by the very industry we, as consumers, believe it is holding accountable. Red Tractor boast that they perform 60,000 audits on farms each year. However, an investigation revealed that as few as 0.08% of those visits were unannounced. In the case of Lambrook Pig Farm in Somerset, for example, which was the subject of a national press expose that discovered dead and living pigs covered in excrement, and pigs held in tiny concrete pens and tethered with chains hanging from the ceiling, Red Tractor had audited the farm and passed it as acceptable. This means that the farm had cleaned up its act for the inspection that was expected, or Red Tractor simply turned a blind eye to what they saw. Either situation provides a damning indictment of the legitimacy of the scheme itself. The Red Tractor assurances only meet the basic requirements and do not go meaningfully beyond anything other than what is required by law. And yet, their logo is plastered all over animal products as if it signifies something important. At its core, all the label means is that the product in question comes from a farm that isn't operating illegally. And sometimes not even that is true, as Red Tractor approved farms have been exposed for illegally electrocuting animals, for breaking the necks of animals and leaving them convulsing on the floor while still alive, for deliberately stamping on and throwing animals, and much more. In fact, illegal practices have been documented on farms that have passed multiple Red Tractor audits, again making a complete mockery of the scheme and its auditing process. Once you see the Red Tractor label for what it really is, the whole illusion of animal farming begins to slip. This is the reality of the facade that we have been presented with. The Paradox of the RSPCA. Despite the protection of animals being their core purpose, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, RSPCA, founded in 1824, and arguably the largest animal welfare organization in the world, is not much better. In the early 1990s, the RSPCA created the Freedom Food Welfare Scheme, which was meant to ensure that farmed animals were given 5 freedoms: from hunger and thirst, from discomfort, from pain, injury, or disease, from fear and distress, and to express normal behavior. The scheme, however, regularly drew criticism, as the requirements for farmers to be RSPCA certified did not guarantee the list of objectives were met, and still allowed, as examples among many others, mutilations such as tail docking, teeth clipping, and castration, and the rearing of animals intensively indoors. The Farm Animal Welfare Committee, an independent advisory board set up by the UK government, later stated that the 5 freedoms were merely ideal states, or aspirations, as opposed to standards for acceptable welfare, which is a position that the RSPCA has reiterated in their guidelines as well. In 2015, the RSPCA rebranded their Freedom Food label, changing it to RSPCA Assured, removing the 5 freedoms and instead opting to approve farms if they meet their farm animal welfare standards. The RSPCA doesn't state how many of their farm audits are unannounced. Instead, they state that to make sure that someone is on site when the assessor arrives, we book the assessment in advance. They also perform informal check-ins. These aren't assessments, but instead consist of the RSPCA's farm livestock officers providing advice on different farming practices and how best to implement the standards. The RSPCA only has 5 of these offices covering the entire UK. Furthermore, farmers have to pay an annual membership to become part of the welfare scheme, meaning that the RSPCA is auditing farmers who financially support them. The RSPCA have certified around 70% of Scottish salmon farms, but also revealed in 2020 that they were paid more than £500,000 by Scottish salmon farmers. Not to mention that the RSPCA's farm salmon advisory groups, which exist to provide advice on fish welfare, are filled with people from the fish farming industries. This means that the RSPCA's welfare guidance for fish farming is being very heavily influenced by the fish farming industries themselves. This becomes even more concerning when viewed alongside an investigation into 22 Scottish salmon farms that was carried out by Compassion in World Farming and released in 2021. The investigation documented farms owned by producers who also sit on the RSPCA's advisory groups and revealed severe levels of sea lice infestations, open wounds, and high numbers of on-farm mortalities, with bins and open pits filled with dead salmon. Many of the farms had also been given RSPCA assured certification previous to the investigation, and following the investigation retained their certification. Astonishingly, the RSPCA have even certified salmon farms where employees were shooting seals to stop them from eating the fish they were farming, with the RSPCA's head of campaigns stating in 2018 that seal shooting is not culling, it's about pest control. Thankfully, the practice of shooting seals was outlawed in the UK in early 2021. However, this came about not because salmon farmers wanted to stop killing seals, or because the RSPCA was campaigning to end the practice, or even because the Scottish government, who handed out licenses to allow it to happen, realised that it was wrong. It was made illegal because there were fears that the USA, which accounts for 26% of Scotland's salmon exports, would ban the import of Scottish salmon, as shooting seals would break their wild marine mammal welfare laws. It's not just the RSPCA's technical advisory groups for the salmon industry that are of concern. Their Chicken Standard Technical Advisory Group has members who also hold senior positions at Moy Park and Two Sisters Food Group, two of the largest chicken companies in the UK. And their Laying Hen Standards Technical Advisory Group includes members from the egg industry, including the chairman of the British Egg Industry Council, who is also the technical director of Noble Foods, the largest egg producer in the UK. The British Egg Industry Council was set up to represent the egg industry, and its members are the 11 major egg companies in the UK. So, the chairman of a council that exists to best serve the egg industry is also a member of the Laying Hen Advisory Group for the UK's leading animal welfare charity. The actions of the RSPCA have allowed cruel practices to be inflicted on animals, while simultaneously alleviating the concerns of consumers about those practices. The RSPCA is meant to be for animals what the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, NSPCC, is for children. But while the NSPCC works to end cruelty to children, the RSPCA works to normalize cruelty to animals, and even profits from it by receiving funds to hand out certifications to those carrying out the acts of cruelty. When discussing the guidelines for farmed animals, a representative from RSPCA stated that standards have got to be commercially viable, In essence, the animals are involved in a non-consensual compromise, where any consideration for their lives must be weighted against the financial burden such a consideration will incur on the farmers. This statement is effectively an admission that the RSPCA is fully aware that the guidelines they create aren't what's actually best for the animals. The RSPCA has stated that they believe that it is better for them to work within the industry, but it seems highly unlikely that there will be RSPCA-assured Labrador steaks or RSPCA-assured minced poodle anytime soon. In fact, the RSPCA has been working in China to end the dog meat trade, not to make it RSPCA-assured. Plus, that argument is obviously deeply flawed when viewed alongside the idea of the NSPCC working with child abusers or anti-human trafficking charities working with traffickers. The farming of animals may be legal, while the abuse of children and human trafficking clearly isn't, but that's really besides the point. A charity seeking to prevent cruelty should be doing exactly that. However, the RSPCA finds itself stuck between a rock and a hard place. It is a charity reliant on public donations and philanthropic offerings, and if it began to campaign against the consumption of animal products, it would risk alienating most of its financial supporters. However, this means that its work is less concerned with ending cruelty to animals and more about courting public opinion. So, the question remains, is the RSPCA genuinely interested in preventing cruelty to animals? Or is it simply creating policies around social norms, even though those norms are in fact perpetuating cruelty to animals? Unfortunately, the RSPCA does very little when breaches of welfare are committed, and animal agriculture workers are found to be breaking the law. In the case of Hode's Farm, an egg farm in Sussex, the RSPCA initially removed their certification following footage that revealed ill and deformed birds and dead hens in varying stages of decomposition left around the farm. They then reinstated the certification, even though the farm had not only broken the RSPCA guidelines, but had also broken the law, as it is supposed to be illegal to neglect a farm animal. The farm was reinstated with special measures. They would receive unannounced visits. But at the very least, it should have had to show compliance with the rules and guidelines before regaining its certification. Instead, they received no punishment and didn't even lose their certification. This is all part of a systemic problem with animal farming oversight. Even when farms break the law, they are hardly ever punished by the legal system for doing so. While the RSPCA is meant to be creating accountability, it is often financially incentivized to not prosecute farmers. This is because the charity's reputation would be brought into question if it did, as it would reveal the failings in its oversight and animal welfare management. Instead, the RSPCA can simply say that the farms have been visited, and the organization is now satisfied that they are compliant, meaning nobody is prosecuted, and the RSPCA goes on receiving fees from farmers for keeping them certified, and at the same time, further reassuring the public that there is nothing to be concerned about. Animal cruelty is not a case of one bad apple. Unfortunately, situations of law breaking and welfare breaches are anything but uncommon. According to an investigation by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, there were more than 9,500 recorded animal welfare breaches in the UK between July 2014 and June 2016 at slaughterhouses alone, including nearly 4,500 Category 4 breaches, which are the most serious. However, meat inspectors stated that this number was not truly representative, as inspectors are often intimidated into not reporting breaches or simply don't witness them. These breaches included chickens being boiled alive, pigs being submerged alive in tanks of scalding hot water, animals not being stunned properly or even at all before slaughter, and trucks of animals suffocating or freezing to death. A single breach can involve hundreds of animals, as was the case when nearly 600 chickens died after being left in very hot conditions in the truck in which they had been taken to the slaughterhouse. The investigation by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism stated that many animals are presented for slaughter in appalling condition. The records show some emaciated or too weak to stand, others diseased or suffering from fractures and open wounds. Failures in stunning procedures, which can result in animals regaining consciousness before being killed, are commonplace. Regardless of this, a lawyer working on behalf of the meat industry complained that the rules requiring a permanent veterinarian presence in slaughterhouses were too stringent. A group called Animal Aid investigated 15 slaughterhouses in England and published their findings in a report in 2017. They filmed the law being broken in 14 of these slaughterhouses, including workers punching animals, burning them with cigarettes, and deliberately electrocuting them. In 2 slaughterhouses, nearly every single pig was improperly stunned. The one slaughterhouse that didn't break the law during the 3 days of filming that took place there was still deemed by the Food Standards Agency, FSA, the organization that oversees slaughterhouses, to have been implementing poor practices. The reality is, we've been told so often that we treat animals humanely that we assume malpractice or illegal abuse must be a rarity, and that the standard legal practices can't be that bad. But unfortunately, abuse of animals is simply systemic and legally condoned. And, from the perspective of animals, the legal practices also cause them suffering, pain, and fear. So, how do we farm animals, and what exactly do these practices look like? The reality behind a bacon sandwich. It is estimated that around 1.5 billion pigs are killed globally each year, with the vast majority being slaughtered in China and the USA. The mother pigs, called sows, are impregnated either by being placed in a pen with a boar or through artificial insemination, where semen is usually obtained by a boar mounting a dummy and a worker acquiring the semen by hand. A device, called a breeding buddy, is then placed on the back of the sows to stimulate them before a worker places a catheter inside their cervixes and begins the process of inserting the semen. In the UK, the use of gestation crates was banned in 1999. However, in countries such as the USA, Canada, and China, they are still used as standard practice. The EU also only has a partial ban on their use, meaning sows can still be kept in the crates for up to 10 weeks every year. A gestation crate is a tiny metal cage that measures roughly the same length and width of the pregnant pigs, meaning that once in the crate, the sows are unable to turn around and are restricted to being able to stand up and lie down. The pigs will spend their entire pregnancy, which is around 16 weeks, inside these crates. Underneath the sows is concrete flooring, with the back section slatted, which they defecate and urinate through. In the stalls, the sows display signs of extreme stress and frustration. Unsurprisingly, as these highly intelligent animals, for weeks on end, can only spend their time endlessly biting on the bars, either to relieve their boredom, or in the hope that they will one day break free. But they never do, and they never will. At the end of the sow's gestation periods, they are moved to farrowing crates, which are essentially the same as gestation crates, with the pigs being unable to turn around, with the addition of a section to the side of the cage to allow the piglets to suckle from their mothers. The mother pigs will live in the farrowing crates for up to 5 weeks. Their piglets are separated from them around 4 weeks after they have been born. In the UK, farrowing crates are still legal and are considered standard practice. The National Pig Association, NPA, has even been working to ensure that a ban on farrowing crates isn't implemented in the UK, with the chairman of the NPA stating in 2021 that they had been attempting to steer government towards sensible practical solutions in order to avoid a repeat of the banning of gestation crates in the late 1990s. Farmers say that farrowing crates are used to stop the sows from crushing their piglets. However, research has shown that there is no difference in piglet mortality between those whose mothers are kept in the crates and those who are not. In reality, farrowing crates allow farmers to house more pigs in less space and are more cost efficient, a point the chairman of the NPA implied himself when discussing his opposition to a potential ban on the crates, stating that he feared producers would be forced to exit the industry if more costly alternatives had to be found. After the piglets have been weaned, the sows are usually impregnated again within a couple of weeks, and the process repeats. This cycle of impregnation and incarceration continues for around 3 to 5 years, at which point the sows are taken to the slaughterhouse to be killed for cheap pork products like pies and pastries. I used to love sausage rolls and would get them all the time, never once considering that they are made from the ground up body parts of multiple mother pigs. Piglets usually have their teeth clipped out and their tails chopped off without the use of any anesthetic as soon as they are born. The mutilations are carried out to reduce incidences of pigs attacking one another or cannibalizing, both of which are consistent problems in pig farms due to the confinement of the pigs and the subsequent frustration and boredom they endure. The fact that the farmers mutilate the piglets to prevent these behaviors is, in essence, an acknowledgement that they know the farming causes the pigs psychological and physical distress. Routine tail docking of pigs is actually illegal, but an estimated 81% of piglets in the UK are still docked anyway. Castration is not banned in the UK, but is still uncommon. However, it is still standard practice in most countries around the world, with newborn piglets being castrated with a scalpel. This is done to avoid something called boar taint, which creates an unpleasant taste and smell in the meat. To get around this problem, pigs in the UK are slaughtered at a younger age. When the piglets are separated from their mothers, they are moved to fattening pens, which are normally concrete or metal pens with slats in the floor for the pigs to defecate and urinate through. Even outdoor reared pigs spend half their lives being farmed inside, often in slatted pens. The only difference is that for the first half of their lives, they have access to the outside. This doesn't mean they have access to pasture, though, as pens can still be concreted, as long as they are not fully enclosed inside and provide access to an outside area and some fresh air. Outdoor bred means the piglets are born outside, but are then brought inside after they are weaned, at around 4 weeks, to be fattened. It is estimated that only 3% of pigs will spend their entire lives with access to outdoor space. In outdoor reared and outdoor bred systems of pig farming, the sows are not kept in farrowing crates, but are kept in huts with access to an outside area. A former Red Tractor CEO said in regards to outdoor bred pork, "The advantages are some people are prepared to pay more money for it because they think it's better welfare." On the outdoor reared and outdoor bred farms I have visited, this translated to the sow being kept in a metal gated area, which has a covered hut and some straw. They can turn around and walk about a little, but the fact that they are kept in a marginally better situation than the sows housed in farrowing crates is hardly a consolation. While one system may be preferable to the other, neither are preferable objectively speaking. Such is the paradox of animal welfare legislation. We are sold the idea that animal welfare is important because it means that we are not causing as much suffering to the animal as we could. But just because we could do something worse doesn't mean that what we are doing is okay. It's akin to making the claim that human exploitation in the garment industry is moral because the workers are given a cushion to sit on and a bottle of water. It is also not unusual for pigs who are sick to be killed on farms. For adult pigs, the most common forms of on-farm death are being shot either with a rifle or shotgun, or with the use of a captive bolt stunner. The issue with the captive bolt is that legally it is only meant as a method of stunning and is not commonly used in slaughterhouses for pigs, as their suitable target areas are very small and their brains lie deep in their heads, meaning that the bolts will often be ineffective at rendering them unconscious. This can result in multiple shots being required, causing intense suffering and trauma. However, because it is primarily designed to stun the animals, the pigs still often have to be killed as well. This can be done through a process called pithing, which is where a rod is thrust through the bolt hole in the skull and through the brain, down towards the tail before being slid back and forth to cause damage to the brain and upper spinal cord. Alternatively, the pigs will be bled out, which is where they have their throats cut. Due to the ineffectiveness of the captive bolt, the animals can remain conscious throughout either process. Piglets are often killed because they are too weak or are not growing fast enough. The most common form of humane death for piglets on farms is a process referred to as external trauma, often informally known as thumping. This involves the piglets receiving a sharp blow to the top of their heads, sufficient to break their skulls. The most common way that this is done is by the farmer lifting a piglet by their back legs and slamming their head down, either on the floor or against the wall. This process often needs to be repeated several times to ensure the piglet is dead. Otherwise, they can be left conscious, but with severe hemorrhaging. An investigation on a UK farm revealed that workers were thumping piglets against the bars of the crates housing their mothers. And at a different UK farm, workers were filmed using hammers. This practice is not only legal, but is defended by the National Pig Association, who refer to it as an effective and appropriate way of humanely killing a piglet. It is allowed by Red Tractor and the RSPCA as well. Pigs are generally sent to a slaughterhouse to be killed at around 5 to 6 months old. They are transported in large haulier trucks, which can carry hundreds of pigs at a time. The animals can be kept in these trucks for up to 28 hours in the USA and Canada. During this time, they are denied access to food or water, and they are often transported during extreme weather conditions, with animals dying from heat stroke and heart attacks because of the intense heat, or alternatively, freezing to death during the winter. Once at a slaughterhouse, there are two main methods of pig slaughter. The first is electrical stunning, followed by exsanguination, which is where the pigs are hoisted by one of their back legs and have their throats severed. The electrical stunning is carried out by a current being applied to the head of the pig. Unfortunately, because the animals are scared and will try to escape, it can be very difficult for slaughterhouse workers to apply the electric current in a way that causes unconsciousness. This can mean that the pigs either have to be stunned repeatedly, each time enduring a painful electric shock, or that they are still conscious when they are then hoisted by their legs to have their throats cut, bleeding out while still awake. After they have had their throats cut, the pigs are then transported down the kill line to the scalding tank, where they are lowered into very hot water that loosens their bristles and skin. It is not uncommon for pigs to still be alive when they are entering the scalding tank, meaning that they drown in extremely hot water. The other method of pig slaughter, which is regarded as the most humane in places like the UK, Australia, and most of the European Union, is the use of a CO2 gas chamber. 2 or 3 pigs are loaded into a metal gondola that is lowered into a pit filled with carbon dioxide. The concentration of CO2 is normally 80% or higher, which is recognized as being highly toxic for pigs. In fact, it has been shown that concentrations above 20% create a toxic reaction. The carbon dioxide replaces the oxygen in the pigs, causing them to hyperventilate and thrash about in a state of panic as they lose consciousness. The CO2 also forms an acid when it comes into contact with wet surfaces, such as the eyes, lungs, and throats of the pigs, causing them pain and distress alongside the suffocation. This process can take longer than 60 seconds. Disturbingly, in 2003, the UK government's Animal Welfare Advisory Board recommended that this practice should be banned, but it has instead become more prevalent. This is how 86% of pigs in the UK are slaughtered. Alternative gases, such as argon or nitrogen, will also cause the pigs to lose consciousness and have been shown to cause less suffering. However, the process takes longer, meaning that the extra time, as well as the higher cost of the gases, makes the alternatives unfeasible in the eyes of the pig meat industry. It is worth stating, however, that the problem with pig slaughter is not solely the manner in which they are killed, but the fact that they are killed at all. Even using a gas that would be less toxic wouldn't make the process moral or objectively humane. I have described the methods used to kill pigs to illustrate how little regard these industries have for the animals, and how disingenuously words such as humane are used. At the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, how can the taste of bacon justify the exploitation, abuse, and ultimately needless death of the animals. The needless death the animals are forced to endure. Got cruelty? What goes into a glass of milk? Cows are mammals, which means that, like humans, they only produce milk once they've had a baby. So, from around 15 months old, cows begin the process of being impregnated, most commonly through artificial insemination. This is done by a farmer acquiring semen from a bull, normally by using a dummy cow and an artificial vagina that the farmer will manually guide the bull's penis into, or through a process called electroejaculation, which involves the insertion of a device into the bull's rectum that delivers an electric shock. The farmer will restrain the cow in a device known as a cattle crush, and then insert their arm inside her anus to hold her cervix in place through the lining of the anus before injecting the semen into her. A cow's gestation period is around 9 months. The newborn calf will take his or her first drink from their mother, as the first feed contains colostrum, which is full of nutrients and antibodies. However, once the newborn calf has drunk the colostrum, the farmer separates them from their mother, normally within the first 24 hours. This is done so that the farmer can take as much milk as possible to be sold for human consumption. I have visited many dairy farms, both in the UK and abroad, but one experience in particular sticks out for me. I and several others had gone to a dairy farm with the permission of the farmers. As we were wandering around, we came across a pen, inside of which was a mother cow and her newborn baby. The baby was so newborn that the mother was still licking her clean. As we stood there, the farmer told us that he was about to separate them from each other. He then proceeded to bring in what was essentially a cage on wheels. He opened the door of the cage, picked up the calf, and put them inside before closing the door and wheeling them off. As soon as he walked away, the mother cow followed behind to see where he was taking her baby. I ended up walking with the mother as far as we were allowed to go. The farmer, still wheeling the mother cow's baby, walked through an open gate, stopped, and then closed it on us both. The mother cow watched her baby being taken further and further away from her. She turned her head and looked at me, hoping I would open the gate so she could catch up. There is something profoundly moving about looking into the eyes of an animal. You recognize that behind those eyes is someone who is having an experience, and through that recognition you can empathize with that experience. The same is true when they are suffering. The mother cow looked directly at me, but I was completely useless and unable to do anything to help. The normalization and legalization of her suffering meant that she had no way of being reunited with her baby. She would never be able to escape from what we humans were doing to her. Cows form a strong maternal bond with their children, and their herds are matriarchal. Consequently, the separation of the child from their mother causes them both deep psychological distress and grief. The mother cow will then be milked by the farmer 2 or 3 times a day, taking the milk that is meant to feed her child, before she is then forcibly impregnated again as the process repeats. Dairy cows have been selectively bred, meaning that they would produce up to 10 times more milk than they naturally would. This places a huge amount of strain on their bodies, increasing their risk of developing mastitis and lameness. Due to the pain placed on their bodies through the milking and calving process, mother cows will sometimes do the splits, where their back legs splay out. In the event of this happening, a farmer will use a chain called a hobble to shackle their back legs together. When we think of dairy cows, we think of cows grazing in fields, and that is true for many of them in the UK, albeit only for a certain part of the year due to weather limitations. However, around 20% of UK dairy cows are farmed in zero grazing systems, and in the USA, the majority are kept in such facilities, with the USDA estimating that 40% of all dairy cows are housed in tie stall systems, which is where they are restrained in individual stalls. In Canada, that figure is 75%. And more than a third of dairy cows in Germany are housed in tie stalls. Due to the strain placed on their bodies, cows become infertile and too weak or too ill after around 5 to 7 years, significantly less than their natural 20-year lifespan. When they are no longer profitable for the farmer, the cows are deemed to be a financial burden and not worthy of life, and are taken to the slaughterhouse. The most common method of slaughter is a cow being forced into a stun box, where the slaughterhouse worker will then use a captive bolt gun to render her unconscious. Due to the precision required, and the fact that the cows will move around and try to escape, it is very common for the captive bolt to be used ineffectively. This results in either multiple bolts to the head being applied, or the cow still being conscious as she is then released from the stun box to be shackled by one of her back legs. Once shackled, the cow will have her throat cut, which will then cause her to bleed to death before she is transported down the kill line to begin the process of being skinned and butchered. Disturbingly, there are many accounts from workers describing cows arriving at the butchering stage while still alive, meaning their bodies have been cut open and their skin peeled off before they have died. About half of all the beef consumed comes from the dairy industry. So, while I did not realize it at the time, replacing meat with halloumi when I went vegetarian wasn't stopping cows from being slaughtered. The truth is, the dairy industry is very much the meat industry, just with the added years of cruelty before the cows reach the slaughterhouse. It is estimated that in Europe, around 3% of dairy cows sent to slaughter are in the last trimesters of their pregnancies, meaning that they have babies inside of them that could be capable of independent life. Because of this, the RSPCA has a set of guidelines on what should happen in the event of a pregnant cow being brought to slaughter. They state that the cow should be killed in the normal way, but should then be left hanging on the kill line for at least 5 minutes to allow the fetus to die. However, sometimes the slaughterers don't know the cow is pregnant, or they don't have time to wait. The kill line is constantly moving. Or they wait the 5 minutes, but the baby inside hasn't died. In these situations, the baby can fall out alive, conscious and gasping for air as their mother is being butchered. In the event of this happening, the RSPCA states the baby should be killed with an appropriate captive bolt or by a blow to the head with a suitable blunt instrument. Their first and last experience of life is on the kill floor of a slaughterhouse, their mother hanging over them being butchered and cut apart as a worker approaches them to beat them to death with a blunt instrument. There is something profoundly wrong with the leading charity that is meant to protect animals is giving out instructions on how to kill an animal who has just been cut out of their dead mother. And remember, the UK is the best in the world when it comes to animal welfare. Back on the farm, calves are separated from their mothers and placed in solitary confinement hutches. A so-called deluxe hutch measures around 2 meters long, 1.2 meters wide, and 1.4 meters high. The calves are legally allowed to be kept in these hutches for the first 8 weeks of their life, although calves have been documented still living in these hutches at 6 months old, barely able to move and with sores on their backs from rubbing against the top of the crates. They will also be mutilated by being disbudded, a process where their horn buds are burnt out with a hot iron or eroded with a chemical. After 8 weeks, the calves will then be moved into group housing, where the females will begin the process of being incorporated into the herd to follow in the footsteps of their mothers, where they too will begin the cycle of being forcibly impregnated, having their baby separated from them, and ultimately being killed in a slaughterhouse. For the male calves, there are several options that a farmer can choose. First, they can raise them for veal. Many people are not aware that the veal industry only exists because of the dairy industry. In the EU, 6 million dairy calves are killed for veal each year, with the most common kind being so-called white veal. This is created by the calves first being separated from their mothers and placed in solitary confinement hutches. They are then fed a low iron diet, which can cause anemia and is designed to keep their flesh pale. After the first 2 weeks of their lives, the farmers are not legally obliged to provide bedding, and the calves are typically housed on slatted floors, which makes lying down extremely uncomfortable. The calves are then raised in groups from 8 weeks of age. They will spend the rest of their lives in these pens before they are taken to the slaughterhouse at around 20 to 24 weeks old. Like their mothers, the most common method of slaughtering calves is the use of a captive bolt gun before they are shackled by their legs and their throats are cut. The process is the same for rose veal, just without the low iron diet and likely anemia, and the calves are slaughtered when they are between 8 and 12 months old. In the USA, it is estimated that around 450,000 to 700,000 calves are killed for veal each year, with the majority of states still allowing the use of veal crates, tiny wooden boxes in which the calves are often unable to turn around and can even be chained by their necks to further reduce the movement. Just like in the EU, they are fed a low iron diet, which, combined with the lack of mobility, is designed to keep their flesh supple. They can be raised in these crates for their entire life, which is around 18 weeks, at which point they will be sent to a slaughterhouse to be killed. Many are unable to even walk to their slaughter as their muscles are so severely underdeveloped. In the UK, the demand for veal is much lower than it is in continental Europe, so many British dairy calves are transported through the live export system into Europe, where they will then be raised for veal. It is more common for dairy calves to be sold into the beef industry in the UK. However, dairy calves are a different breed to those raised specifically for beef, meaning they aren't as muscular or as financially desirable. Because of this, they are seen as low quality, and are therefore much more likely to be sold at livestock markets and raised in semi-intensive beef farms, which are typically farms where the cattle are raised solely inside. They will also be castrated, which is normally done by the farmer applying a tight rubber ring around the scrotum of the calf, restricting the blood flow and causing the testicles to fall off after a couple of weeks. The other most common method of castration is where the spermatic cords are crushed by using a clamp called a burdizo. However, shockingly, it is often not seen as economically viable for dairy calves to be sold to beef farms, and it can actually cost the farmer more money than just killing them. Consequently, around 60 to 95,000 male dairy calves are shot and discarded soon after being born in the UK every single year. Due to the negative public perception around this practice, supermarkets, dairy companies, and Red Tractor are attempting to discourage it from happening. But the male calf problem doesn't suddenly go away simply because farmers are no longer allowed to shoot them. As a result, more farmers are now selling their live calves to dealers who then take them to intensive beef farms or to slaughterhouses. An investigation in 2021 showed that calves as young as 9 days old were left overnight on their own during winter in a slaughterhouse. The next morning, at 10 days old, they had their throats cut and were bled out. Their bodies were incinerated or turned into products such as pet food or tallow, a substance that is used in the production of money, among other things. A 10-day-old baby, whose only experience of life is being taken away from their mother, loaded into a truck and driven to a slaughterhouse, is left in the cold overnight on a concrete floor before their throat is cut, all so we can pour their mother's milk over our cornflakes. If the color of milk reflected the reality of the industry, it would run red with blood of all the animals exploited and killed for their dairy products. One sec. Alright. Where's the beef? The true cost of a beef burger. The first stage of beef production is calf rearing, where the cows being used for breeding are either artificially impregnated or are placed with a bull to get them pregnant. When the calves are born 9 months later, they have their ears tagged and their horn buds removed using a hot iron or an erosive chemical. The males are castrated as well. In countries such as the USA, Canada, and Australia, beef cattle are also often branded with a red-hot iron. The process of cattle farming frequently involves the cattle being sold at auction markets and then transported to different farms. Auction markets are stressful environments where animals are kept in crowded pens as they wait to be sold. In the auction rooms that I have visited, the animals acted frantically, trying to find a way out. Instead, they are forced to stay in the pens by workers with paddles who guard the entrances and exits of the auctioning pens while the farmers bid on their bodies. I remember watching as the farmers observed the animals, not looking upon them as individuals but as objects, bidding for ownership of their lives based on aspects of their bodies such as their weight or build. It disturbed me that a room full of people could witness the clear signs of distress in front of them. But instead of working to stop it, they were actively perpetuating the system that caused it. The distress is so normalized that it's not even noticed. After they have been weaned from their mothers, which is normally at around 6 to 8 months old, calves are then typically taken elsewhere for the growing phase before then going into the finishing phase, which can be on a different farm again. The purpose of this stage is to get the cattle to gain as much weight as possible in a short space of time, meaning that even in outdoor grazing systems, the cattle will often be given some supplementary food to get them to slaughter weight. Interestingly, in the dairy industry, farmers will say that the reason they separate newborn calves from their mothers is because it is actually in the best interests of the mother and calf. Yet in the beef industry, where there is no financial incentive to separate the two, they are commonly allowed to remain together. In countries such as the USA, Australia, and Canada, Feedlots are a common way of getting cattle to slaughter weight. Even animals who are raised in pastures are often finished on grain in grassless pens, where they are housed in large numbers, with some feedlots confining 85,000 cattle within them. They are deemed to be a more efficient and cost-effective way of getting cows to slaughter faster, as they require less land and a grain diet allows the cattle to gain weight quicker. In the UK, the number of US-style feedlots is on the rise, with herds of up to 3,000 cattle now being fattened by this method. Often, the cattle will have spent time on pasture before being moved to the feedlots for the last quarter of their lives. Beef cattle are commonly slaughtered when they are between 12 and 24 months old, but there have been calls from the National Beef Association for calves who are slaughtered at 8 months old to be able to be labelled beef rather than veal. This is so that they can kill animals earlier and not have to worry about consumers being less inclined to buy the product. Beef cattle are killed by being forced into a stun box and having a captive bolt shot into their head. A study into the stunning of cattle in the EU revealed that 12% of cattle are shot more than once and 14% of calves were shot inaccurately. In total, 12.5% of cattle were deemed to have been inadequately stunned, meaning they will have been either fully or partially conscious as they had their throats cut. The study also showed that, on average, cattle don't have their throats cut until 105 seconds after being stunned, even though it is meant to happen within 60 seconds to ensure the animals don't regain consciousness. As one ex-slaughterhouse worker in the USA put it, when describing his experiences of seeing conscious animals on the kill line, "I've seen thousands and thousands of cows go through the slaughter process alive. The cows can get 7 minutes down the line and still be alive. I've been in the side puller, a machine that peels the cattle's hides off, where they're still alive. All that hide is stripped out down the neck there." At another slaughterhouse, a USDA animal health technician even complained to his superiors. "I complained to everyone. I said they're skinning live cows in there." Always it was the same answer. "We know it's true, but there's nothing we can do about it." A few years before I became vegetarian, I started eating rare steak, and I would make comments about it being extra bloody, as if it was something to be proud of. But although I might have enjoyed eating steak with a steak knife, I would never have been the person to cut the animal's throat with a slaughterer's knife, and I certainly wouldn't have looked at my actions proudly if I saw just how bloody a piece of steak really is. While we might enjoy the taste of a burger or steak, such pleasure is trivial when stacked against the ethical cost of these products. Kentucky Fried Cruelty: The Violence in a Sharing Bucket. When I used to consume KFC, I never once stopped and thought consciously about the chickens I was eating. I'd order wings, but I never thought about the fact they were body parts, or that for every 2 wings I ate, 1 chicken had to die. Or how a bucket contained multiple dead chickens, 1 meal equaling many lives. When we consider the sheer volume of chicken body parts we eat, it's perhaps not surprising that, apart from insects, they are the most abused and exploited terrestrial animal on the planet. Every year, around 66 billion are killed, which means that more than 180 million are killed every single day. Chickens have been selectively bred to reach slaughter weight by the time they are between 35 and 42 days old. This frequently leads to organ failure and leg problems, as their bodies grow too fast for their joints and organs to keep up. Put into context, if a newborn human grew at the same rate as a farm chicken, they would weigh 28 stone by their 3rd birthday. The life of a chicken raised for meat, referred to as a broiler chicken, is so horrible that the fact they are alive for such little time is a mercy. In the USA, more than 99.9% of chickens are factory farmed, while in the UK it is more than 95%. Fertilized chicken eggs come from broiler breeding farms, where the males and females used for breeding are kept in indoor barns. Because the chickens grow so fast, farmers starve the birds so that they can slow the rate of growth and get as many fertilized eggs as possible from the hens. However, starving the birds causes them psychological distress and increases the incidence of abnormal behaviors, such as aggression and feather pecking. The males are often mutilated, as well as by being debeaked. Having the ends of their toes cut off and dubbed, which is where their combs are completely or partially removed. When the males and females are no longer suitable for breeding, they are slaughtered. The fertilized eggs are then taken to hatcheries. The chicks hatch and are vaccinated before they are transported to the farms, where they are placed in barns that can hold as many as 50,000 birds. In the UK, farmers will typically allow each bird an area less than the size of an A4 sheet of paper. I vividly remember the first time I ever visited a chicken farm. I was in the decontamination area that you had to go through before entering the main barn, and I looked through a window at what was inside. It was like watching something on TV. My brain couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. The barn seemed to be never-ending, extending far off into the distance, and the completely white floor was moving. It took me a second to realize that the entire floor was made up of tens of thousands of chickens, who were so crammed together they had created what, on first inspection, looked more like a living carpet. I felt completely overwhelmed. If we see an animal suffering, we empathize with that one animal. But when we see thousands, it can be difficult to comprehend the experience each individual is having. But each animal in front of me was enduring their own individual experience of suffering. I then thought of all the other barns on the farm, each containing a similar number of individuals. Legally, the barns are allowed to be windowless and artificially lit, which means the farmers can better control the environment. The farmers encourage the birds to eat more feed and grow larger by altering the lighting, with research showing that 20 hours of light a day creates the highest growth rate in birds. Every time I have visited a chicken farm, the lights have always been on, even when it's the middle of the night. However, red tractor standards in the UK mean that by 2023, a barn will need windows that equate to 3% of its floor area. On that first visit, I proceeded to open the door into the main section of the barn, and tentatively took my first steps, the chickens in front of me flapping their wings and struggling to move as I cautiously stepped around them. These particular chickens were nearly ready to be harvested, an industry term meaning the birds were only a few days away from being sent to slaughter. The term harvested is a good example of how desperately the industry tries to hide behind euphemisms. As soon as I opened the door, I was hit by the thunderous noise of the ventilation system, which created an unrelenting wall of sound that was only matched by the loud chirping emitted by the tens of thousands of birds that surrounded me. As I continued to walk through the barn, I sank into the mounds of feces that covered the entire floor, nearly causing me to lose my shoes and biosecurity shoe covers on several occasions. The barns are only cleaned when the chickens have been sent to slaughter, which means that every day the mounds of feces pile up, and by the 6-week mark, every step you take is either onto a chicken or into excrement. This buildup of feces causes the air to become acrid with ammonia. The hazardous gas damages the respiratory systems and eyes of the birds, which can lead to lesions in their corneas, partially, or completely blinding them. The ammonia can also cause something called hock burns, which are burns around their knee joints that come from them standing in feces all day. The ammonia can also scorch off the feathers on their undersides, leading to painful red burns around their chests. As I wandered around the barn, everywhere I looked, there were chickens laid on their backs, unable to move, pinned down by their own weight, gasping at the ammonia-filled air as their organs failed and they slowly died. Other chickens had their legs splayed due to their weight, rendering them unable to move. These animals would die from starvation and dehydration, unable to reach the water and feed points situated around the barn. There were also dead birds in different stages of decomposition. Some who had died earlier that day, and others who had died many days earlier. Some had rotted so much they were featherless and semi-buried under feces. Farmers are supposed to work their way through each barn daily and pick out the dead birds and cull the ones who are close to death. They do this by either stamping on them, bludgeoning them, or by swinging them around by their necks to break them. It's hard to know exactly how many chickens die on the farms, but the estimated on-farm mortality rate in the UK is 4%, which, if the same was true worldwide, would mean that for every 180 million chickens killed each day in slaughterhouses, another 7.2 million chickens will have also died on farms. In many ways, the ones who die on farms are the lucky ones. There is only suffering in chicken production, every second of every day. These animals are bred specifically to grow as fast as possible and then die. Even ones that are rescued and taken to an animal sanctuary will normally die within a matter of months. Their bodies are simply not meant to last. A chicken farmer who says they care about their chickens is akin to a tobacco company saying they care about the people getting lung cancer. For the birds who survive to slaughter age, teams of catchers then work their way through the barns, roughly picking up the chickens and forcing them into crates, which are then loaded onto trucks that take them to the slaughterhouses. It is estimated that in the UK alone, nearly 1 million chickens die on the way to slaughterhouse each year, often because they are crushed in the crates and suffocate to death, or because their bones have been broken and dislocated due to being handled roughly. Once in the slaughterhouse, the birds are killed in one of two ways. First, they can be loaded into gas chambers and suffocated, using a mixture of gases such as carbon dioxide and nitrogen. The progressive suffocation can lead to convulsions, gasping, vigorous wing flapping, and panic. Alternatively, they are shackled upside down by their feet onto a conveyor belt, which then carries them through an electrified water bath that is supposed to stun them before they then have their throats dragged over a rotating blade that cuts their throats. Due to the speed of the line, some birds do not make contact with the electrified water bath and can be conscious when they have their necks pulled over the blade. Other times, the blade might not cut their necks properly, meaning the animals are still alive when they are submerged into the scalding tank where their feathers are loosened. Free-range chickens are often breeds that have a slower growth rate, meaning that they are kept alive for longer. But that normally only translates to them being alive for 56 days, which is just 2 to 3 weeks longer than conventionally raised broilers. They also have daytime access to an outside area for at least half of their lives. But that only has to equal 1 square meter of space per bird, and a farmer can house roughly 13 free-range chickens per square meter of space indoors, which is compared to the roughly 17 birds per square meter of space that is permitted on a conventional red tractor farm. They are also killed in exactly the same way. As I made my way out of the chicken farm, I looked into the barn one last time, the heat and the sound hitting me like a wave of pangs of guilt, for all the individuals I had once forced to live their short, terrible lives in these barns came back over me. I closed the door behind me, sealing the chickens back in their eternal prison. At that moment, I couldn't help but feel complicit in the system I sought to oppose. In the eyes of all the birds, I was the same as their abusers. After all, they were still there, although not for much longer. The catchers would still be arriving. The catchers would soon be arriving. Why there's no such thing as a good egg. Hens raised for their eggs are a different breed than those raised for their meat, which means they won't grow to be the same size. So, male chicks are useless to the egg industry and are considered a byproduct, their lives deemed to be worthless. Because of this, when the chicks are born in hatcheries, they are separated based on their sex. The males are put on one conveyor belt and the females are placed on another. The conveyor belt for the males then usually goes to one of two places: a gas chamber, where they are gassed to death, or an industrial macerator that grinds them up alive. This happens in all systems of egg farming, including free-range and organic. In some countries, male chicks are alternatively suffocated in bin bags or crushed to death. The other conveyor belt takes the female chicks to a machine that debeaks them. They are then loaded onto trucks that take them to growing sites, where they stay for about 16 weeks before being taken to the laying farms. In the UK, about 42% of egg-laying hens are kept in cages, and globally, about 60% are caged. Caged hens are entitled to slightly more space than the size of a sheet of A4 paper each, meaning they are unable to stretch out their wings. They are also forced to stand on wire mesh, which they defecate through. If a hen gets picked on or becomes the victim of a more aggressive hen, they are unable to escape. The other main system of egg farming is free range. When we see a box of free-range eggs, we may believe that these eggs must come from hens who have lived a good life and didn't suffer. Before I was vegan, that's what I thought. I thought that you had a choice between buying caged and causing suffering, or buying free-range and giving hens a nice life, so I always bought free-range. I eventually realized that this is not the case. Free-range hens must have access to an outside space during the day. However, inside the barns, farmers are legally allowed to house 9 birds per square meter of space. Because egg-laying hens have been selectively bred, they lay around 300 eggs a year, which places an extreme amount of stress on their bodies. Both caged and free-range hens can suffer from broken bones due to their calcium reserves being diverted to making the shells of their eggs. A survey of 67 flocks in the UK showed that the rates of fractures in non-cage systems was anywhere from 45 to 86%. Osteoporosis is also a problem, with it being estimated that 30% of the total mortality of hens in cages is linked to the condition. The hens can suffer from respiratory disease and egg peritonitis, which is where a hen's reproductive system becomes inflamed and infected, often because an egg hasn't formed properly and has become infected with E. coli. Prolapses can also occur from the excessive amount of egg laying, and skin diseases such as red mite infestations and ammonia burns are common. In many countries, a process called forced molting is allowed, which is essentially where the farmers put the hens on a starvation diet that makes them lose their feathers. This is done to force the hens to grow fresh feathers, which works to rejuvenate their reproductive systems, leading to larger eggs afterwards. It's a way in which farmers can maximize the amount of money that can be made from the hens' bodies before they eventually go to slaughter. Once an egg-laying hen is about 72 weeks old, her egg production declines, meaning that the farmer no longer sees the benefit of keeping her alive. As a result, egg-laying hens are then loaded into crates, placed onto trucks, and taken to slaughterhouses, where they will be killed in the same way as the chickens who are raised just for their flesh. All egg-laying hens that don't die on farms are killed in slaughterhouses and turned into cheap meat products. Forcing lambs to the slaughter. One of the first times I ever saw a lamb up close was outside of a slaughterhouse in Somerset. They were lying dead on the floor outside the entrance to the kill floor. There was a pool of blood that had formed around the sheep's face, suggesting they had suffered a head injury. In the holding pen, just next to the dead lamb, were several dozen more lambs. These ones were alive, though, waiting for the worker to open the door and force them through it one by one. When the worker entered, the lambs moved as far back from him as they could. He began pushing and shoving them through the door, causing them to jump over one another in a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. After a dozen or so lambs had entered the building, he followed them in and closed the door, leaving the remaining lambs outside, waiting for the same process to happen again. A nearby conveyor belt, which began inside the building but carried objects out through a hole in the wall and dropped them into the courtyard, started moving. After only a few minutes, its purpose became clear. The skin of a lamb emerged through the wall, falling onto the ground. The next one appeared, and then the next. After the last skin had emerged, a worker came to move them so they could later be turned into items like sheepskin rugs. The door to the holding pen then opened again, and the worker began forcing the next dozen lambs into the building. Lamb and sheep farming is often viewed as the most idyllic form of farming. However, just because we see sheep grazing in the fields doesn't mean that they don't suffer, and it doesn't change the fact they too have their lives needlessly taken from. Artificial insemination of sheep is more complicated than with most other farmed animals, which means that many countries such as the UK mainly breed sheep using rams. However, in countries such as Australia and New Zealand, artificial insemination is widely practiced in the sheep industry. This first requires semen to be obtained from a ram. Most commonly, this is done by restraining a ewe and coaxing a ram to mount her. However, the farmer will then place the ram's penis into an artificial vagina instead. The other method is through ejaculation. The process of insemination then involves a ewe being clamped down onto a trolley, which positions her on her back with her underbelly exposed. The inseminator then makes 2 incisions, one on each side of her stomach, before inserting a scope into one side to see inside the ewe. Gas is often pumped inside her in order to displace the intestine, stomach, and bladder so that the inseminator can better view the womb. He then takes the semen and injects it through the other incision and into the uterine horn of the ewe. A ewe's gestation is around 5 months, at which point she will give birth to 1 or 2 lambs, although some breeds average more than 2 lambs per litter because of selective breeding. In the event that some of the lambs die, farmers will carry out a process called grafting, which is essentially the act of getting a ewe to adopt a lamb that is not biologically hers. The preferred method of grafting is for the farmer to skin the dead lamb and place their skin over a living orphaned one. Male lambs are castrated, normally by a rubber ring that is secured around the base of the scrotum until it falls off. However, there are also other legally permitted methods, such as surgical castration, which involves cutting the testes out of the scrotum. Both males and females will have their tails docked, with the rubber band method being commonly used for tail removal as well. Other methods include the use of a tail iron, where a heated blade is used to sever and cauterize the tail, and the clamp and surgical removal method, where a clamp is used to crush the bone in the tail and kill the nerves. The tail is then left for a few days before being removed using hot irons. In Australia, the world's leading producer of wool, providing a quarter of all wool globally and 80% of all merino wool, the process of mulesing is standard practice. Mulesing is a process in which a sheep is restrained on their back and then has the flaps of skin around their backside cut off. It is an incredibly painful procedure that leaves the lambs with open wounds that take weeks to heal. The justification for both mulesing and tail docking is that it is done to prevent fly strike, a condition where flies lay eggs in the moisture, urine, and feces that is retained by the wrinkled skin around the backside of sheep. There are alternative non-surgical methods that can be used. However, they require more management, and due to flock sizes, most farmers are unwilling to implement these less invasive methods, as they are more effort and cost more. The reason why fly strike is such a prevalent issue in the first place is because sheep have been selectively bred to produce excessive amounts of wool. The more wrinkled a sheep is, the more folds there are, and the higher the volume of wool that is produced. It is often believed that it is ethical to wear wool because sheep need to be sheared. However, this is only true because we have selectively bred them in such a way that they no longer naturally shed their wool for the warmer months like wild sheep do. In essence, we have changed them physically to maximize the amount of money we can make from them, and then we mutilate them to try to reduce the incidence of a condition that is a problem precisely because we have selectively bred them. Then, to top it all off, we claim that the reason we mutilate them and literally carve off chunks of their skin is because we care about their well-being. About 15% of lambs who are born die, with some of the major causes including cold exposure and infectious diseases. While we view sheep farming more positively because it involves outside grazing, farmers are unable to properly care for all the animals in their flock, and accept the financial losses of dead lambs as being preferable to the extra management and expense that would be required to bring down lamb mortality. Many farmers also want to cash in on the spring lamb market, so they induce pregnancy earlier in the year than would be normal for sheep. This means that the lambs are born in winter, and many are unable to survive the freezing temperatures. Lambs raised for their flesh are generally slaughtered at around 5 to 8 months old. Lambs will either be sold directly to a slaughterhouse, or they will go through the stressful environment of an auction market. Once at the slaughterhouse, the most common method of slaughter is the use of electrodes on a device that looks like a pair of tongs. The device is placed on either side of the lamb's head and electrocutes them. Alternatively, the lambs will be stunned by a captive bolt. They are then hung upside down and have their throats severed. Although some lambs will be sheared before slaughter, there is less value in their wool, which often means that the cost of shearing will outweigh the price the farmer can get for selling the wool, and is not therefore considered to be financially viable. Also, the meat can fetch a lower price if the lambs are bruised, which commonly happens during the shearing process. However, the skins of lambs are used and sold, often as single pelts, referred to as sheepskin or lambskin, or turned into leather. Sheep used for breeding and for their wool are kept alive for longer and will be sheared once or twice every year. The process of shearing is often touted as being a harmless process, sometimes even compared to a haircut. However, an investigation into more than 30 shearing sheds in the USA and Australia caught shearers punching, kicking, and stomping on sheep, hitting them in the face with electric clippers, and standing on their heads, necks, and legs. It was a similar story in the UK, where an investigation into 25 shearing sheds showed animals being stamped on, kicked, slammed, and choked. The process was so brutal that sheep were often cut open, which led to the shearers sewing them back up without any pain relief. These sheep will be kept alive until they are no longer deemed to be profitable enough, at which point they too will be sent to a slaughterhouse. I need some water. Hang on. Alright. Screaming silently. The true horror of fish consumption. Fish are the animals that we kill the most of by far. To put it into perspective, we kill approximately 80 billion land animals every year. However, it is estimated that we kill somewhere in the region of 0.8 to 2.3 trillion wild fish and 51 to 167 billion farmed fish in the same period. We often view fish as being animals that have short memories, lack any form of notable intelligence, and don't even have the capacity to feel pain. However, this is untrue. The nervous systems of fish are similar enough to those of birds and mammals to show that they do feel pain, and when fish experience something that would cause other animals physical pain, they behave in ways suggestive that they feel it. Fish will learn to avoid unpleasant experiences, like electric shocks, and painkillers reduce the symptoms of pain that they would otherwise exhibit. Even crustaceans, such as prawns, have demonstrated similar behaviors by responding to acid being brushed on their antennae, showing complex and prolonged movements that diminished when local anesthetic was applied beforehand. Studies such as these have led to a scientific panel for the European Union concluding that the evidence shows that fish do feel pain. Moreover, fish have also been shown to have stress responses, with their cortisol levels becoming raised when they are taken out of water and placed in a bucket. Fish have also been shown to act intelligently. They can be taught how to evade a trap and remember it a year later. And they can learn from each other, recognize other fish they've spent time with previously, know their place within fish social hierarchies, and remember complex spatial maps of their surroundings. Fish also work together with different species of fish and show cooperation and trust, with fish remembering which other fish were cooperative or uncooperative. In the commercial fishing industry, impaling live bait on hooks is common practice. Longline fishing uses hundreds or even thousands of hooks on a single line that might be anything from 50 to 100 kilometers long. On each of these hooks is often a fish who has been impaled through their face or body as a means to entice larger fish to eat them and get hooked themselves. Furthermore, when the larger fish take the bait, they are likely to remain caught for many hours before the line is hauled in. Another method of catching wild fish involves gill nets, which are walls of fine netting in which fish become snared, often by the gills, which can lead to suffocation. If they don't die, they can remain trapped for many hours before the nets are pulled in. The other most common method is bottom trawling, where huge nets are dragged across the sea floor, trapping anything that gets in their way before being hauled out of the water. Fish caught in the wild are then dumped on fishing boats, and they will die either by suffocation, being crushed under the weight of all the other fish on top of them, or through rupturing of their internal organs caused by the rapid pressure changes when they are hauled out of the water. The fish that are still living when they begin to be processed will die through a combination of suffocation and evisceration when the animals are gutted alive. Sometimes fish are put onto ice as they suffocate. However, this has been shown to increase the severity of their distress and causes them to suffer for longer, as even though the cold can paralyze them, scientific studies have shown that they remain conscious and can feel pain and stress. One study found that some fish can remain conscious for 20 to 40 minutes after they have been gutted, depending on how much of their body has been removed. This is absolutely horrific. Fish suffer and feel pain, and yet we butcher and gut them while they are still alive. Aqua farming, which is the equivalent of factory farming for fish, and is responsible for more than half of all fish consumed worldwide each year, involves fish spending their entire lives in underwater enclosures, normally either in sea cages or concrete tanks. Many species of fish that we consume are adapted to the open ocean and swimming long distances. Salmon, in particular, can travel thousands of miles, but in fish farms they are confined in cramped areas where they can only swim around in circles for their entire lives. Farmed fish are bred by having their ovulation or release of sperm induced through hormone injections. They are then often killed and gutted for their eggs, or, in the case of the males, killed and their semen squeezed out of them. Alternatively, fish farmers will take the live fish and force the eggs and semen out of them by squeezing along their abdomens. Many species of farmed fish have also been selectively bred, including salmon, who have been altered to grow abnormally fast and consequently suffer from compromised immune systems, enlarged heads, and breathing difficulties. Because of overcrowding in the cages, the fish are more susceptible to disease and suffer from stress and physical injuries such as fin damage, eye cataracts, and spinal deformity. as well as parasitic infections. Due to the prevalence of parasites and disease, a device called a thermolyser, which pumps salmon through tubes and across metal rollers that are filled with water above 30 degrees Celsius, is used to remove the lice. However, research has shown that temperatures above 28 degrees cause behavioral responses in salmon indicative of pain. The treatment has also been shown to cause gill damage, scale and skin loss, and brain hemorrhages. The thermolyser is another lice treatment called a hydrolyser, which is similar, but instead uses water pressure to remove the lice, were, according to data from the Scottish Government, responsible for killing more than 100,000 farmed Scottish salmon between August 2017 and January 2018 alone. However, death is not uncommon on fish farms, with as many as 20 million salmon dying prematurely in 2019 on Scottish salmon farms alone. Because of the high mortality rates, antibiotic use is rampant. Fish are regularly handled roughly on aqua farms, and fish that are deemed too sick are taken out of the tanks and often bludgeoned to death. In a 2020 investigation of 4 rainbow trout farms in the UK, including one that supplies a company endorsed by Jamie Oliver, workers were filmed throwing live fish, kicking them and bludgeoning them with wooden batons. Crustacean farming also involves suffering, with female prawns enduring a mutilation called eye stalk ablation, where the farmer either cuts off the eyes of the female prawns or squeezes and pulls them off instead. Alternatively, farmers will tie threads around the base of the eyes so that the blood supply is cut off and they fall off after a few days. This is done to destroy the glands behind the eyes that control the maturing of the ovaries, which forces them to grow rapidly, meaning the females can be used for breeding faster. Farmed fish are slaughtered by a range of methods, such as gassing with carbon dioxide or cutting their gills without stunning. Similar to wild-caught fish, some farmed fish are simply left to suffocate in air or on ice. Alternatively, some are killed by being electrically stunned or hit over the heads before then being bled out. It is also worth mentioning that many farmed fish are carnivorous, including salmon and sea bass. This means that they can be fed wild-caught fish, and the production of farmed fish therefore also contributes to the suffering of wild fish as well. The methods by which fish are both farmed and killed are arguably the least humane out of all the animals that we kill. Even though this is the case, they are often the animals whose suffering we most ignore. It is easy to turn a blind eye to what fish are forced to endure, but they are still forced to endure it nonetheless. The human cost. People often accuse vegans of valuing non-human animals over humans. After all, there are still human rights issues that we need to address and solve. So shouldn't we deal with those first, before worrying about other animals? This argument, of course, overlooks the fact that animal rights and human rights aren't mutually exclusive, and we can instead work towards improving them both at the same time. But it also fails to address the cases of human exploitation within the animal exploitation industries. For example, human rights transgressions are rampant in the seafood industry, with tens of thousands of workers estimated to be victims of forced labor, human trafficking, and debt bondage. Seafood from this exploitation has been traced to real retailers and restaurants in the USA, Europe, and Asia. Residents living in areas around farms have been shown to have increased rates of respiratory health problems related to air pollution from gases such as ammonia. A 2021 study revealed that 12,700 deaths occur a year in the USA because of pollution from animal farming. While in India and Bangladesh, due to the chemicals required to turn cattle skin into leather, tannery workers suffer from health problems such as skin diseases, acid burns, eroded fingers, peeling skin, eye problems, and even sudden death, with the chemicals also increasing their risk of cancer. But the problem of human exploitation within animal farming is an issue that exists everywhere and is as systemic as animal farming itself. Although we may not realize it, animal exploitation doesn't just make the world more violent for animals, it also makes the world more violent for us humans as well, further adding to issues of human suffering and exploitation. It's common for people to question the ethics of someone who works in a slaughterhouse, and yet doing so overlooks the real reason why people work in these places: a lack of choice. Slaughterhouses are found in lower income areas where there are fewer job opportunities. It's one of the lowest paid industrial jobs with one of the highest turnover rates. It is also an industry filled with worker exploitation. An inquiry released in 2010 by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, EHRC, in the UK found practices that appeared to break the law in UK slaughterhouses, particularly on issues regarding health, safety, and equality, with basic human rights being endangered. The Commission also found evidence of the mistreatment of workers who were pregnant, as well as workers being prevented from using the toilet and being physically and verbally abused by their supervisors and line managers, with stories of employees being kicked and having objects thrown at them, as well as being subjected to verbal attacks. Workers even reported that agency managers would block off the factory exits to make them work overtime after their shifts had ended. Following on from the inquiry, the EHRC attempted to work with the industry to try to improve conditions. However, another investigation published in 2017 by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism revealed more cases of abuse, bullying, and harassment taking place in UK slaughterhouses, with an industry source stating that there was plenty of day-to-day abuse that is just accepted as part of the culture and environment. A different investigation, also by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, revealed that slaughterhouse workers are employed in one of the most dangerous jobs in the UK, with workers suffering from crush injuries, eye damage, amputations, and loss of limbs, and even death. Slaughterhouse work has also been linked to severe mental health problems. A Brazilian study from 2012 looked at the mental health of 3 groups of people: workers who slaughtered birds, the slaughterhouse administration staff, and university students. Students scored 10% higher than the administrative staff when it came to their levels of anxiety. However, slaughterers scored 70% higher for anxiety and 67% higher for depression. Another study found that poultry workers had an 80% higher rate of depressive symptom compared to workers from companies that weren't involved in the poultry industry. Slaughterhouse workers have also been shown to suffer from alcoholism, drug abuse, sleep disturbances, destructive social consequences, suicidal thoughts, PTSD, and something called perpetrator-induced traumatic syndrome, which is similar to PTSD, except it is caused by having committed violent acts oneself, instead of witnessing or being a victim of a traumatic event. As a society, we condemn people who kill animals. If someone stabbed a dog, we would presume that they were either mentally unwell or an evil person. However, We expect people who spend upwards of 60 hours a week repetitively stabbing chickens, pigs, cows, and lambs to hang up their bloody aprons at the end of the day and then just integrate back into normal society. The emotional burden of doing the work that almost nobody else wants to do because of its violent nature, and doing it because you feel you have no other choice and are therefore trapped, must inevitably lead to desensitization, repression, and anger for many. Throughout this chapter, I've described witnessing many terrible things that happen to animals. They stick with you as memories that you can't quite ever shake. Sometimes they just randomly fill your head or infiltrate your dreams. And the smells and sounds are so visceral and overpowering. They stay with you just as much as what you see. If I hear the screeching of tires, the sound reminds me of the screams of the pigs I have heard being gassed to death. What started as a leisurely walk becomes a flashback to the slaughterhouse or the farm. Those blood-curdling screams never leave you. If I sit quietly, I can hear them reverberating around my skull, as if the ghosts of those animals existed inside me. A constant reminder of the transgressions I used to commit and the violence that exists every single second of every single day. An unrelenting massacre. But for these workers, this is their life, day in, day out. They do to thousands of animals what many of us would never want to do to even one. In the words of one ex-worker, "I had suicidal thoughts from the guilt. I still dream about it now, and I can't look at dead animals packaged up in the supermarket. And think about this as you're tucking into a roast. You didn't hear the tortured screams of those animals. You didn't see them fight with every ounce of their strength to stay alive. You didn't clean their blood from the factory floor. I did, and the guilt will haunt me forever." Accepting the uncomfortable truth. As I stated at the beginning of this chapter, what we do to animals is really disturbing to read about. But it's important that we know what happens so that we can make informed choices. Ultimately, there is no right way to do the wrong thing. And exploiting and killing animals and causing them pain and suffering when we don't have to is absolutely wrong. Welfare guidelines and assurance schemes are nothing more than humane washing, a way to ease the conscience of the consumer, in the same way that companies greenwash products to make them more appealing to those who care about the environment. These industries realize that people hate animal cruelty, and they know that most of us would be appalled if we witnessed the standard and legal practices that take place on farms and in slaughterhouses. That's why they sell us an ideal of happy animals living wonderful lives and being killed in a compassionate and kind way. But this isn't what is happening. We're told not to worry because we have incredibly high standards and a legal system that means if anyone is caught doing anything even remotely wrong, they will be punished. This is all nonsense. It is a lie. Propaganda. There really is no such thing as a happy farm animal. We are capable of so much more. Alright, that's the end of chapter 3 and my voice. So I'm going to go into the voice chat, and so if people want, they can discuss it. So, what do people think?
Hello?
I think I love this chapter. I think this chapter is incredibly useful. I'm glad that we'll have a recording of it that'll be timestamped. It's a really good resource. I think it was very well argued and evidenced, and I'm glad that we've got such a recent overview of how animals are treated in farms. Because if we point to stuff like animal liberation, it was first written in the early 70s and then updated in the late 80s and stuff. And people could argue, well, that was then and this is now. I'm also glad that he focused on, the highest standards, the highest welfare standards in the world. There is actually an organization called the Animal Protection Index, I think, and they will give grades to different countries from A to F for different areas of animal protection. And he said that Australia has some of the highest standards in the world. That's not actually true. We get a D in farm animal protection under the Animal Protection Index, which is the same as the USA. I think the UK gets either B or an A. Yeah. But it is true that UK is near the top.
I only caught like the last 2 minutes of that. What was that actually about?
So this was chapter 3 of Ed Winter's book, This is Vegan Propaganda. You might know him as Earthling Ed. And so it's about how farm animals are treated.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to say that you're really good with the narration and the reading. It was pretty good. You didn't like make even a single mistake, and you read for like 2 hours straight. Amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. I was a bit worried that, because I haven't done 2 hours before. Last time I did, like each chapter was about an hour, so I took a break in the middle.
Yeah, it's a long time to read without breaks.
Yeah. Were people able to pay attention for that long?
I was able
about that halfway.
I was able to pay attention, but there were certain parts that I had a hard time listening to, like the graphic details of the animal, like practices that like how they're being tortured, basically, just because it's just hard for me to stomach that stuff in general. And I've seen a lot of the footage and I know it all. And it's hard to just keep going over the same content because it's so horrible. But other than that, like it was pretty easy to follow for me.
Cool. Yeah, I like the reports. I like the journalism showing how, like, every time we investigate it, like, over 90% of them are engaged in, like, criminal conduct and none of them get prosecuted or anything like this. And, yeah. I liked the comparison of the RSPCA to the NSP something, the child protection one, where it's like, we should work with traffickers and have pragmatic, commercially viable standards and all this stuff. Yeah. Just not what you would do if you actually cared about their well-being or respected them at all, right?
Yeah.
Which is a paradox at the heart of welfarism, is if you respect their well-being, why are you so willing to kill them when you don't need to?
Well, welfarism is really just about maintaining what they're currently doing. Like they just want to continue to keep farming animals and try to do it in a way that makes it so people don't feel bad about it. But clearly they don't care.
Yeah. I liked how he said that a chicken company representative saying they care about their chickens is like a tobacco company representative saying they care about people with lung cancer.
Yeah. Yeah, farmers seem to say that a lot, that they care about their animals.
I
It's
treat
kind of
my animals
strange.
like they're my children.
Yeah. If that's true, they should have their children removed.
Yeah. No, I mean, the National Institute for Child Protection should just work with them. So that was big. Let me go over the subheadings again. I'll give a bit more structure to the discussion. So, starts off with red tractor and RSPCA. I think that's good. I know a lot of people who. So I'm from Australia, so it's just the RSPCA here, and I know a lot of people who think, well, the RSPCA is keeping like track of this stuff. Like they're making sure that the chickens have like massages and all that shit. So it was good to start with red tractor and RSPCA. Also to explain that the RSPCA is not independent of industry; they are the customers of industry. And sorry, the industry is the customer, and the customer is always right. It's just ridiculous that the leading animal protection thing that has a lot of legal powers. Here, the government gives the RSPCA special powers to investigate and prosecute and stuff. They're not independent. They're not publicly funded. That's ridiculous. What's the point?
Yeah, it's bullshit.
Yeah. So I'm glad he went over humane washing and how. So there's this concept of regulatory capture, which is when the industry pretty much has heavy influence over regulatory bodies. But this relies on there being some level of separation between industry and regulation. Otherwise, it's not regulatory capture. It's just self-regulation. So this is not even regulatory capture. This is self-regulation, pretty much. Yeah, the way we treat pigs is terrible. The way we treat dairy cows is terrible. I wish I had heard about all of this stuff when I was first becoming sensitive to how animals are treated, because it took me 5 months for it to really click. Like, oh, eggs is no better and dairy is no better. These are the same thing.
Yeah, I totally wish I had more information, because I was a vegetarian for a long time before I became vegan, and I would have just been vegan if I knew.
Okay, I don't know about you guys, but did you guys like avoid watching like Earthlings or Dominion or anything like that? Because I was vegetarian too for like a month or two, and then I finally actually watched one of the documentaries, and then I was like, oh, I should be vegan. Duh. It was like I don't know, like when you were a vegetarian, did you just like not? How did you?
Well, Earthlings came out in 2005, so I became a vegetarian in the 90s.
Right.
So
okay.
this didn't really exist. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess like, yeah, you wouldn't have been using the
like
internet and stuff. So.
No, the internet didn't exist, and there wasn't this kind of information that there is today.
Well, what about Jordan?
You vegans being like, oh, what, you didn't even watch Dominion early on?
No, I'm saying like what was for you? What was the reason that it didn't click? Like, did you just not see Dominion or Earthlings or something?
I'm not sure.
Or were you
so we all have like psychological barriers we have to overcome, and part of that is just hearing correct information over and over until it actually sinks in, and whatever misconception you had before fades away. And so I think my psychological barriers with meat being oppressive, they went away quicker than the ones about eggs and dairy. There was also one vegan in my life who was a total idiot. He didn't know much at all, and so whenever I would press him on like, why don't you eat eggs and dairy, he could never give like a decent answer. And I didn't bother looking for the best representative. I just stuck with the one that was around me.
All right. Okay.
What else have we got? We've got beef and then chicken.
If you don't mind me asking, what part of Australia are you from?
Queensland.
Okay.
Yeah, southeast Queensland.
I'm originally South Australia, but I work in Newcastle.
Oh, cool.
South Australia was better.
Yeah. So we've got lambs. So I found that interesting, like sheep and lambs. Sorry, it's all blurring. The parts about fish were interesting as well. So most farmed animals are actually fish. Like it says there's between 51 to 167 billion farmed fish per year, right? It's hard to track. The annoying thing about fish statistics is that it's measured per ton rather than per life. But yeah, that's interesting. Most factory farming is aquaculture, and it's just as bad because it's super confined. But it's more of a biohazard because wild fish will come and swim next to the sea cages, and they're susceptible to the same infectious diseases. Also, the way we've selectively bred these fish, they can then get out or breed and some way mingle with the wild fish, and then we've got selectively bred genetic lines getting into the wild, and that could fuck shit up as well. Yeah, I also liked the section on the human cost, where it talked about
Sorry. Sorry, I missed the part about fish. Does it have anything? Does the book have any stats on, or any papers, or any references for the propensity for fish that are selectively bred to escape out into the wild from a fish farm cage?
No, he didn't mention that. So,
oh, okay.
My recollection of that comes from The Ethics of What We Eat. So in that, Peter Singer talks about all the problems with aquaculture and how it is an enormous biohazard. I can't remember if I got it from anywhere else. I could send you the sources on that if that is what it says. Yeah. Yeah. So I like the section where he talks about how pretty much no one is safe in a slaughterhouse. There's something called the Sinclair effect, which is based on the book The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, which is about how workers are brutally oppressed in meat packing plants and stuff, and slaughterhouses. Yeah, everyone is miserable and unsafe in a slaughterhouse, pretty much. And once those people get home from being forced to do violence all day, you actually see that rates of domestic violence rise significantly in areas where a slaughterhouse has recently been established there. So it is an issue for gendered violence as well, even though virtually everyone who works at a slaughterhouse is a man. And so that's got its own kind of exploitation where men are just expected to face the most heart-wrenching work and unsafe and at risk and all this kind of stuff. Very often it's the most exploited groups in society, so especially immigrants, people who have not the most secure residential status and don't fully understand workplace health and safety laws, their rights about being paid or any of this. I've heard, so when I used to do outreaching, there was one person who said that if they didn't accept a job at a slaughterhouse, they'd be denied their visa and they'd be sent back to a country where they were not safe. And so we kind of threaten people with destitution or, you know, being severely harmed, and get them into slaughterhouses, which is messed up. And also, I found it really interesting that there were 13,000 people in the US every year dying from the localized air pollution of factory farms. That's huge. That's like as many as gun homicides, I think, or more. So, yeah. It'd be good to have like all causes measured, not just air pollution. Yeah. So, if no one else has anything to say, I'll add that if you want an even longer version of this kind of thing, there's The Ethics of What We Eat by Jim Mason and Peter Singer. It's a book-length investigation into how farmed animals are treated, and it goes into, you know, the highest welfare farms and, you know, not just farmed animals, but also agricultural production of food that we eat. So that's a really good resource as well. I think they came out in 2006. That was actually one of the first books I read that helped me go from eating meat to fully vegan. So that was good. Alright, I'm happy to wrap it up here. And next week, I'll probably be reading the next 2 chapters. So the next part of the book is about, it's called Playing with Fire. It's about the environmental impact, environmental impact, public health, so like related to pandemics and stuff, but also just disease, and then personal health. Yeah. All right, thank you guys for listening.
Hey, thanks for reading. That was really good.
Thank you.
I had a question about the air pollution thing.
Yep.
Because I muted for a little bit because it was it's getting pretty dark, so I went and did laundry for a bit. Did the book cover the air pollution stuff during that chapter, or?
Yes, it was this chapter. So it was under the human cost. So I can send you the reference for that if you want. It said a 2021 study revealed 12,700 deaths occur a year in the USA because of pollution from animal farming.
I definitely want to see that.
All right,
that's great.
I'll link that in. I'll probably link it in the book club chat.
Okay, so.
All right. Thanks. See ya.